The air inside the dealership always smelled the same, a strange, chemical mix of new car plastic, expensive leather, and the overpowering cherry scent of the little trees dangling from the rearview mirrors. It was a smell Gary Mitchell had come to hate. It smelled like desperation. He stood in his glass-walled office, a box of a room that felt more like a fishbowl every day, and watched the sales floor. His jaw was tight. An email from his regional manager was still burning a hole in his screen, the words underperforming and last chance glowing like warning lights. He could feel a headache starting, a dull throb behind his right eye. Another month of numbers like this, and he'd be out on the street, just another guy who couldn't cut it in the high-stakes world of luxury auto sales. He took a deep, shaky breath and tried to push the fear down. It just sat in his stomach like a stone outside his office. The polished concrete floor reflected the fluorescent lights from above, making the whole place feel bright and sterile. Rows of beautiful, gleaming machines sat parked at perfect angles, each one a promise of speed, wealth, and a better life. But for Gary, they were just monuments to his failure. He watched his team, a pack of wolves in cheap suits, circling the few customers who had wandered in. They were hungry, and he was the pack leader who hadn't been able to find them a decent meal in weeks. That's when he saw him. A man had walked in so quietly that the bell above the door had barely made a sound. He was dressed in a simple, well-worn t-shirt and faded jeans, scuffed boots on his feet. His dark hair was a bit messy, and he had a day's worth of stubble on his face. To Gary, he was the classic tire kicker. Someone who would come in, sit in every car on the lot, ask a million questions, and then leave without ever opening his wallet. Gary felt a familiar wave of annoyance. He didn't have time for this today. He needed real buyers, people with checkbooks and good credit. The man wandered slowly through the showroom, his hands clasped behind his back. He didn't gawk at the newest, most expensive models like most people did. Instead, he seemed to be looking for something specific, his eyes scanning the rows of cars with a quiet, focused interest. He passed by a gleaming red sports car without a second glance, but stopped for a long moment in front of a classic, dark green muscle car from the late 60s, one that had been tucked away in a corner. He just looked at it, a small, almost sad smile on his face. A young salesperson named Chloe, who had only been with the dealership for a few months, noticed him. She was still new enough to believe that every customer deserved respect, a lesson Gary had tried his best to beat out of her. She saw the man's genuine interest in the classic car and decided to approach him. As she got closer, her steps faltered. She recognized him. It was the guy from that movie, the one about the computer world with all the green code. And the one with the bus? And the one where he was the cool, detached detective. It was Keanu Reeves. Her heart did a little flip. She took a breath, remembered her training, and decided to play it cool. "Beautiful, isn't she?" she said, her voice friendly and warm. 68. They don't make them like that anymore." The man turned, and his face broke into a gentle, genuine smile that made him look even more familiar. "Yeah," he said, his voice quiet and thoughtful. "They really don't? The lines on this, it's like a piece of art." He ran a hand lightly over the hood, not touching it, just appreciating the air above the polished paint. "I've been looking for one for a while. A project, you know? Something to bring back to life with my own hands." Chloe was thrilled. This wasn't a tire kicker. This was a real enthusiast. "I completely get it," she said, her professionalism melting away into genuine excitement. "The engine in this one is a beast, but it needs some love. We just got it in on a trade. Let me grab the keys and we can pop the hood if you'd like." "That would be great," he said, his smile widening. "Thank you. I'm Keanu, by the way." "I know," Chloe said, then immediately blushed. I'm Chloe. It's nice to meet you." Keanu just chuckled, a kind, rumbling sound. "It's nice to meet you too, Chloe." From his fishbowl office, Gary watched the exchange with growing fury. He saw Chloe's bright, eager smile. He saw the way she was laughing with the scruffy-looking man. He saw her heading toward the key cabinet, clearly about to waste precious time on someone who, in his mind, had no intention of buying anything. The headache behind his eye was now a full-blown hammer striking an anvil. He couldn't take it anymore. He slammed his office door open, the sound echoing through the quiet showroom like a gunshot. Every head turned. Chloe froze by the key cabinet. Keanu looked up, his expression calm and curious. Gary stormed across the floor, his face red with anger. He pointed a finger at Chloe. "What do you think you're doing?" He barked, his voice sharp and loud in the suddenly silent room. "I told you to focus on qualified buyers. We have a family looking at the SUVs over there. That's where your commission is, not with some wanderer off the street." Chloe shrank back, her face pale. "But sir, he's interested in the classic. He was just telling me about—" "I don't care what he was telling you," Gary snapped, cutting her off. He then turned his full, venomous attention to Keanu. He looked him up and down, a sneer twisting his lips. "And you? This is a high-end dealership. If you're not here to buy, you need to leave. You're scaring off the real customers." The tension was so thick you could feel it. The other salespeople stared at their shoes, pretending not to see or hear anything. Keanu didn't flinch. He just stood there, taking in the man's rage with a look of quiet disappointment. He wasn't angry. He just looked sad, as if he couldn't understand why someone would choose to be so cruel. "I'm sorry if I've caused a problem," Keanu said, his voice even and calm, a stark contrast to Gary's shouting. "I am in fact very serious about this car. I was hoping to discuss the price." Gary let out a short, bitter laugh. "The price? Buddy, look at you. You couldn't afford the hubcaps on this car. Now I'm not going to ask you again. Get out." He took a step closer, invading Keanu's personal space, trying to intimidate him with his size and his anger. The entire dealership held its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The silence that followed Gary's outburst was heavy and uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet that feels loud, filled with the unspoken thoughts of everyone pretending not to watch. Chloe looked like she might cry, her face a mixture of shame and fear. The other salespeople found sudden, intense interest in the floor mats of the nearest cars. But Keanu didn't look away. He held Gary's furious gaze, his own expression not one of anger, but of a deep, unsettling calm. It was as if he were looking at a child throwing a tantrum. With a mixture of pity and disappointment, finally Keanu spoke, his voice cutting through the tension like a warm knife through butter. "Okay," he said softly, turning to Chloe. "It's all right, really." He gave her a small, reassuring smile that seemed to take all the air out of the room. Then he looked back at the fuming manager. "You're right. This isn't the place for this. Let's talk in your office. Like adults." Gary was taken aback. He had expected a fight or for the man to slink away defeated. He hadn't expected this calm, almost dismissive agreement. It threw him off balance. But his ego quickly seized control. If this guy wanted to come into his office and get torn down over numbers, fine. It would be even more satisfying. "Fine," Gary spat, turning on his heel. "Follow me." He led the way, his back stiff with self-importance. Keanu gave Chloe another nod, a silent promise that everything was okay before following. Chloe hesitated for a second, then hurried after them. She felt a strange sense of responsibility, as if she had led a lamb into a slaughterhouse. Gary's office was exactly what you'd expect from a man on the edge. It was a small, glass-walled box, cluttered and chaotic. Stacks of paper covered every flat surface. A whiteboard was covered in frantic red scribbles and depressing sales figures, all trending downward. An empty coffee mug sat next to an overflowing ashtray, the stale smell of smoke mixing with the scent of anxiety. It was the nerve center of a failing kingdom. And Gary was its stressed-out king. He slumped into his high-backed leather chair, which groaned under his weight, and pointed to two simple plastic chairs for his visitors. "So," he began, leaning back and trying to project an air of control he clearly didn't feel, "you want to talk about the 68. Let's talk. The asking price is $45,000. Keanu, who had sat down calmly, simply raised an eyebrow. He didn't flinch at the number. "The online listing for this car, which I saw this morning, has it at $35,000, he said, his voice even. And that's probably a bit high, considering it needs a full engine rebuild and the upholstery is shot. Gary's face reddened. Online listings are for dreamers. This is a real dealership. We have overhead. That price is firm. Okay, Keanu said, not arguing. I also have a trade-in. A 2010 sedan. Well-maintained, low mileage. Gary let out a short, cruel laugh. He tapped a few keys on his computer with unnecessary force, pretending to look something up. Yeah, a real prize. I'll give you $2,000 for it. And that's me being generous. It's a 10-year-old grocery getter. Chloe, who was standing by the door, winced. That was an insultingly low offer, and she knew it. She opened her mouth to say something, but Keanu held up a hand, gently stopping her. He was still perfectly calm. The Kelly Blue Book value on a private sale is closer to $7,000, Keanu stated, as if he were simply commenting on the weather. Even on a trade, a fair value would be around $5,000? But let's not get stuck on that. So we have $35,000 for the classic, minus $5,000 for the trade. That brings us to $30,000. For a moment, Gary just stared. He couldn't believe it. This guy, this scruffy-looking nobody, was negotiating with him as an equal. He wasn't begging, he wasn't getting angry. He was just doing math. It was infuriating. Gary felt his control slipping again. He needed to put this guy in his place. Fine, Gary snarled, a new, nasty idea forming in his mind. $30,000. But then we add the documentation fee. That's $500. And the dealer prep fee, another $700. And the lot fee, $400. And we have to do a full safety inspection and detail. That's another $1,000. So your total is $32,600. Plus tax and title, of course. He leaned back, a triumphant sneer on his face. He had just added over $2,500 in pure profit. It was a classic bully move, designed to overwhelm and confuse a customer into just accepting it. He expected Keanu to be shocked, to get angry, to call him a crook, but Keanu didn't do any of that. He just got very, very quiet. He looked down at his hands for a long moment, then back up at Gary. The disappointment in his eyes was deeper now, tinged with something else. Something sad. You know, Keanu said, his voice barely a whisper, that's not how you treat people. It's just not. The simple, honest statement hit Gary harder than any insult could have. It was a judgment on his entire character, not just his business practices. The walls felt like they were closing in. The numbers on his whiteboard seemed to mock him. The pressure in his chest, which had been building for months, suddenly became unbearable. All his failures, his debts, his anger came rushing to the surface. He felt trapped, exposed, and humiliated by this quiet, calm man, and that's when he broke. All reason fled. A red haze descended over his vision. He didn't think. He just acted. What do you know about it? Gary hissed, his voice dripping with a venom that was purely personal. He leaned forward over his desk, his eyes wild. What do you know about anything? You think your money makes you special? You think it fixes everything? I bet it doesn't. I bet it doesn't fix a damn thing when you're all alone at night, does it? The words were ugly and cruel, designed to hit the deepest, most painful wounds. It was a line no decent human being would ever cross. Chloe let out a small, horrified gasp. Keanu just stared at him, the calm finally shattering, replaced by a look of profound shock and hurt. And in that moment, Gary snapped. With a guttural roar of pure rage, he pushed himself up from his chair, lunged across the desk, and swung his fist with all the frustration and failure of his miserable life. It wasn't a clean, practiced punch. It was a clumsy, desperate act of violence. His knuckles connected with Keanu's jaw. There was a sickening, dull thud that echoed in the small office. Keanu's head snapped to the side. He stumbled back out of his chair, catching himself on the wall before he could fall. For a second, there was only the sound of his ragged breathing. He slowly brought a hand up to his face, touching his jaw. When he pulled his fingers away, he looked at the small smear of red on his fingertips with a strange sense of disbelief. Gary stood there, panting, his anger instantly replaced by a cold, dawning horror. He looked at his own fist, then at the man he had just struck. The world seemed to slow down. He had just punched a customer. He had just punched Keanu Reeves. His career, his life, was over, but Keanu didn't shout. He didn't call for the police. He slowly straightened up, his eyes finding Gary's. The sadness in them was gone, replaced by something cold and hard as stone. He looked at the terrified manager, a man who had just destroyed himself, and spoke with a quiet, chilling finality. "That," he said, his voice low and steady, "was a mistake." He then turned his gaze to Chloe, who was frozen in the doorway, her eyes wide with tears. He gave her a single, slow nod as if to say it was going to be okay. And then, without another word, he turned and walked out of the office, leaving Gary to face the unbelievable wreckage of what he had just done. The sound of the punch seemed to hang in the air of the small office, a dull, wet thud that was somehow louder than a shout. For a full 3 seconds, nobody moved. It was as if time had frozen, trapping them all in a horrible, silent photograph. Gary stood with his fist still clenched, his arm extended slightly, the knuckles already starting to turn red. His face was a mask of shock, his brain struggling to catch up with what his body had just done. He looked from his own hand to Keanu, who was leaning against the wall, one hand bracing himself. Keanu slowly straightened up. He didn't rub his jaw. He didn't cry out. He just looked at Gary, and in his eyes there was no fear, no anger, only a deep and profound sadness, like he was looking at a stranger who had just done something terrible and unforgivable. It was a look that said, "I thought you were better than this." And that look was infinitely more painful than any punch could have been. Gary's chest felt tight. He wanted to say something, to apologize, to take it back, but the words were stuck in his throat, thick with shame and panic. He could see Chloe in the doorway, her face pale, her hand covering her mouth, her eyes wide with a horror that seemed to swallow the whole room. Keanu finally broke the silence. His voice was low, steady, and devoid of any emotion, which made it all the more terrifying. "That," he said, his gaze locked on Gary, "was a mistake." He didn't say it like a threat. He said it like a statement of fact, as simple and undeniable as gravity. Then he did something that completely unnerved Gary. He turned his head slightly and looked at Chloe. His expression softened. He gave her a small, slow nod, a silent gesture that seemed to say, "It's okay. It's not your fault." It was an act of kindness in the midst of chaos, and it made Gary feel even smaller, more monstrous. Without another word to the man who had just assaulted him, Keanu turned and walked out of the office. He moved with a quiet dignity, his steps measured and calm. As he emerged onto the sales floor, a hush fell over the entire dealership. Customers who had been browsing stopped and stared. Salespeople who had been pretending to be busy froze in place. They all saw him walk by, the man in the simple clothes, the faint red mark already beginning to form on his jaw. They didn't know who he was, but they could all feel the weight of what had just happened. He walked past the gleaming cars and out the front door, the little bell above it tinkling softly, a sound that now seemed horribly out of place the moment the door closed. The dam broke. Chloe let out a sob, a sound full of anger and fear. You hit him," she screamed at Gary, her voice cracking. "What is wrong with you?" Another salesperson, a big guy named Dave, who had seen everything from the sales floor, pulled out his phone. "I'm calling the cops," he said, his voice grim. "I saw the whole thing." Suddenly, everyone was talking at once. The regional manager was on the phone. The other customers were gathering their things and leaving, eager to get away from the drama. Gary's world was collapsing around him, and all he could do was stand there in his ruined office. The ghost of Keanu's disappointed eyes burned into his memory. The police arrived 10 minutes later. By then, the regional manager had already been on a video call, his face purple with rage. "Gary, you're fired," he had screamed through the tablet. "Don't even bother to clear your desk. Security will escort you out. You are done. Not just here, you're done in this entire industry." Gary sat in a cheap plastic chair in the break room, his head in his hands, as two officers took his statement. He was still in a state of shock, but a new feeling was creeping in, a bitter, defensive anger. He found himself justifying it. He was provoking me, Gary mumbled to the cops. He was talking down to me in my own office. He acted like he owned the place. I snapped. The officer who was writing everything down just looked at him, his expression unreadable. So you admit to striking him? Gary sighed, the fight draining out of him. Yes, I hit him. He was arrested for simple assault. They didn't handcuff him, which he took as a small mercy. They drove him to the station, he was processed, and a few hours later he was released on his own recognizance. As he walked out into the bright afternoon sun, he felt a strange sense of relief. The worst was over. He'd lost his job, sure. He'd probably have to pay a fine and do some community service. But it was just a punch. It wasn't like he had used a weapon. People had done worse and gotten less. Over the next few days, the story blew up. It was a slow news week, and a story about a beloved movie star getting punched by a grumpy car dealer was pure gold. Gary saw his face on the news, on websites, on social media. He became a national villain, a meme. Don't be a Gary, people would say in the comments. He was the guy who punched Keanu Reeves. He had to turn off his phone because of the angry messages and death threats. He was a pariah, but then, a week after the incident, a new report came out. Keanu Reeves' publicist had released a statement. After consulting with his team, Keanu had decided not to press charges. He hoped the man would get the help he clearly needed. Gary was sitting on his couch in his small apartment, eating a microwave dinner, when he saw the news anchor read the statement. He felt a surge of pure, unadulterated relief. It washed over him, so powerful it almost made him dizzy. No criminal record. No court case. It was over, but then another feeling crept in, a dark, smug satisfaction. He saw it as a victory. Keanu Reeves, the big-shot movie star, was backing down. Maybe his lawyers told him it was a waste of time. Maybe Keanu himself was just too much of a coward to see it through. Gary felt a smirk form on his face. Yeah, he said to the empty room. That's what I thought. All talk. He completely misinterpreted the act of mercy as a sign of weakness. He saw it as Keanu being soft, not strategic. In his mind, he had won the confrontation. He had thrown a punch and the other guy had flinched, had decided the fight wasn't worth it. This arrogance, this complete misunderstanding of the man he had attacked, was the final nail in a coffin Gary didn't even know he was building. Meanwhile, miles away in a quiet, sunlit home, Keanu was on the phone with a trusted friend. He held a small ice pack to his jaw, though the swelling had already gone down. I'm not pressing charges, he said, his voice calm. No, putting him in a cage for a few months doesn't fix anything. It just makes him angrier. The problem isn't just him. It's the whole system. The way it pushes people, the way it rewards that kind of behavior, it's broken. He paused, listening to the person on the other end. A small smile touched his lips. Oh, I have a plan. It's not about revenge. Not really. It's about showing them a better way. It's about building something new. Gary had no idea. He thought the story was over. He thought he had gotten away with it. He started looking for a new job, convinced that his infamy would fade. He was just a guy who had a bad day and made a mistake. He was completely, utterly, and unbelievably wrong. The storm was just beginning to gather, and he was standing right in its path, blissfully unaware of the tsunami that was about to crash down on his life. The weeks that followed were a slow, grinding descent for Gary. The fame, or rather infamy, he had gained didn't translate into any kind of opportunity. No one wanted to hire the guy who punched Keanu Reeves. His old network in the car business shut him out completely. He was a ghost, a cautionary tale whispered about in sales meetings. He burned through his savings quickly, the rent on his apartment and the cost of instant noodles adding up to a quiet, desperate math problem he was losing. Eventually, he had to swallow what was left of his pride and take a job he never would have even looked at before. He became a night stalker at a huge, soulless warehouse on the edge of the city. The work was brutal and mindless. From 10 at night until 6 in the morning, he operated a forklift or stacked heavy boxes on towering metal shelves. The air in the warehouse tasted of dust and cardboard. and the only sounds were the hum of the massive fans and the constant beeping of machinery. He was just a body in a blue vest, a number on a time card. No one knew who he was, and no one cared. For the first time in his life, Gary was completely invisible. He would stumble home as the sun was coming up, his back aching and his hands raw, and fall into a fitful sleep on his worn-out couch. The world moved on without him. The news cycle found new villains. The memes faded. He started to believe, really believe, that he had served his time. The public shaming, the lost job, the assault charge, that was his punishment. He had paid his debt. The story was over. One evening, after a particularly grueling shift, Gary slumped onto his couch, the springs groaning in protest. He popped open a can of cheap beer, the cold metal a small comfort against his tired fingers. He turned on the small, dusty TV, not looking for anything in particular, just needing the noise to fill the silence of his empty apartment. He flipped through channels, stopping on a major network. A commercial was just starting. It was sleek, beautifully shot. The lighting was soft and golden, not harsh and fluorescent like the world he now inhabited. A gentle, thoughtful piano melody played in the background. The camera panned across a clean, open-concept showroom filled with modern, elegant electric cars. People were smiling, talking with relaxed, friendly staff. There was no pressure, no desperation in the air. It looked like a car dealership from a dream. Then, a familiar face appeared on screen. It was Keanu. He was standing next to one of the cars, dressed simply but looking every bit the successful, thoughtful man he was. He wasn't shouting about sales or limited-time offers. He was just looking at the camera, a calm, sincere expression on his face. For a long time, Keanu began, his voice warm and steady, I've believed that the process of buying a car should be a good experience. It should be built on a simple foundation: respect. Respect for your time, respect for your intelligence, and respect for you as a person. Gary took a long sip of his beer, a bitter taste in his mouth. Oh, give me a break, he muttered to the empty room. Another celebrity with a new vanity project, but Keanu continued. Too often that's not what we find. We find hidden fees, aggressive games, and a feeling that you're being treated like a number, not a neighbor. I decided it was time for a different way, a better way. On the screen, the words Arch Motor Company appeared in a clean, simple font. At Arch, Keanu said, the price you see is the price you pay. No haggling, no last-minute add-ons, no games. Our team is here to help you, not to sell to you. Their success is measured by your happiness, not by their commission. Because we believe that an honest transaction is the only kind worth having. A cold knot began to form in Gary's stomach. The words, they were too familiar. No haggling, no last-minute add-ons. It was a direct, perfect mirror of his own worst behavior. He felt a flicker of unease, a strange sense of being watched. Keanu walked through the dreamlike showroom, stopping to chat with an employee who was showing a family a car's features. The atmosphere was one of partnership, not conflict. We built this company on a promise, Keanu said, his voice growing even more serious as he looked back into the camera lens. A promise that you will always be treated with dignity. That started from a very simple idea, that one bad day doesn't have to be the end of the story. It can be the beginning of a much better one. The knot in Gary's stomach tightened into a block of ice. He knew this was about him. This wasn't just a business. It was a response. A monument built on the ruins of his own career. And to make sure we always keep that promise, Keanu said. A small, genuine smile appearing on his face. I wanted to find someone who truly understood what it means to care about the customer experience. Someone who knew firsthand why respect matters so much. The camera shifted. A woman walked into the frame, her smile confident and bright. She was wearing a sharp, professional blazer. She looked happy, successful, and completely in her element. It took Gary a second to recognize her without the cheap dealership polo shirt and the look of constant fear on her face. It was Chloe, she walked up to Keanu and shook his hand warmly. I'm Chloe, she said to the camera, her voice clear and strong. And I'm the head of customer relations here at Arch. My job is to make sure every single person who walks through our doors feels heard, valued, and respected. It's a promise I take very personally." The commercial ended with the two of them standing together, looking out at the fleet of beautiful, honest cars. As the Arch logo and a simple website address filled the screen, the beer can slipped from Gary's numb fingers and clattered to the floor, spilling its contents onto the cheap carpet. He didn't notice. He just sat there staring at the TV screen as it cut to a commercial for a fast food restaurant. The sound and the bright colors were a jarring assault on his senses. He finally understood. This was the revenge. It wasn't a lawsuit. It wasn't a punchback. It was something so much bigger, so much more devastating. Keanu hadn't just gotten over what happened. He had taken Gary's entire world, his flawed, aggressive, dishonest business model, and built a gleaming, successful, beloved alternative right in front of the whole world. He had made Gary the villain in the origin story of a billion-dollar company, and the final, cruel twist was Chloe. He hadn't just built a company. He had elevated the very person Gary had tried to crush. He took the young woman he had belittled and shamed and made her an executive, a symbol of the company's soul. He hadn't just beaten Gary. He had made him irrelevant. He hadn't destroyed his enemy. He had simply created a universe where his enemy no longer had a place. The punch was just the spark. The revenge was the fire that grew to consume everything Gary had ever known. And as he sat in the silence of his small, empty apartment, Gary realized he hadn't just lost a job. He had been made obsolete. The commercial ended, but the images were seared onto the back of Gary's eyelids. The sleek cars, the warm lighting, Keanu's calm face, and Chloe's bright, confident smile. It played on a loop in his mind as he sat on his couch, the spilled beer soaking into the carpet, unnoticed. The cold knot in his stomach had turned to lead, pulling him down into a depth of despair he hadn't known was possible. This was it. This was the end of his story. Not with a bang, but with a beautifully produced, nationally televised corporate announcement. He went to work that night, but he was a ghost inside his own body. His hands moved on their own, guiding the forklift, stacking the boxes, but his mind was miles away in that clean, bright showroom he had seen on TV. The other workers, a rough collection of night owls and quiet loners, left him alone. They could sense something was off, a black cloud hanging over him that was thicker than his usual sullen mood. During his break, a coworker named Frank, a grizzled man with a tattoo of a sinking ship on his forearm, tried to make conversation. "Rough night?" Frank asked, offering him a lukewarm coffee from a thermos. Gary just stared into the distance. "You ever see something," he said slowly, his voice hoarse, "that just shows you everything you're not? And everything you'll never be?" Frank took a sip of his coffee and shrugged. "Every time I look at my ex-wife's new husband's Facebook page." "Why, you see your old boss on TV or something?" "Something like that," Gary mumbled. He couldn't explain it. How could he? "I used to be somebody," he said, more to himself than to Frank. "I was a manager. People listened to me. I had an office. A window." Frank just nodded, not really listening. It was the kind of late-night talk that happened all the time in the warehouse, a litany of regrets and what-ifs. But for Gary, it was different. It wasn't just regret. It was a horrifying, crystal-clear epiphany. He finally understood. For months, he had been telling himself he was a victim of circumstance, a good guy who had one bad moment. But the commercial had stripped away all his excuses. He saw himself for what he was, the villain. He was the reason Arch Motor Company needed to exist. He was the negative space in the picture, the darkness that made the light shine brighter. He hadn't just lost a fight. He had been used as the blueprint for everything a decent person shouldn't be. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, the sun was rising over the sprawling, modern campus of Arch Motor Company. The building was made of glass and steel, designed to feel open and connected to the natural world around it. Inside, the atmosphere was a world away from the high-pressure sales floor Gary had ruled. People collaborated in small groups, the sound of their conversations a low, steady hum of creativity and purpose. There were no private offices, not even for the founder. Keanu walked through the main workspace, a simple ceramic mug of coffee in his hand. He wasn't followed by an entourage or assistants. He was just part of the team, stopping to look at a design sketch on a tablet, offering a quiet suggestion, sharing a laugh with an engineer. He carried the same quiet energy he had in the dealership that day, but now it was amplified by a sense of purpose and creation. He wasn't just an actor playing a part. He was a builder, building something real from the ashes of a single, ugly moment. He found Chloe in her section of the open plan office. Her head of customer relations area was less like a corporate office and more like a comfortable living room, with soft chairs and a wall covered in positive notes and photos from happy customers. She was on a video call, her face full of empathy as she listened to an elderly couple who were having trouble with the charging port on their new car. "No, don't you worry about a thing. Mr. Henderson," she said, her voice warm and reassuring. "That's what we're here for. I'm going to have a technician, Dave, drive a loaner out to you this afternoon. He'll be there by 3. You just take your time and we'll get this all sorted out for you." "Yes, of course. You have a wonderful day." She ended the call and let out a soft sigh, a smile playing on her lips. She looked up and saw Keanu standing there. "Trouble with the Hendersons?" he asked gently. "Just the charging port," Chloe replied. "But to them, it feels like their whole world is falling apart. I remember when I was at the other place, a problem like that would have been the customer's fault. We would have made them feel stupid for not knowing how to work it. We don't do that here," Keanu said, his tone firm but kind. "I know," Chloe said, her eyes shining with gratitude. "That's why this is more than just a job to me. You didn't just give me a career. You fixed something. You took the one worst day of my life, the day I felt so small and helpless, and you turned it into this. A place where making people feel respected is the most important thing in the world." "I don't know how to thank you for that." Keanu just shook his head. "You don't have to thank me. You're the one living it every day. You're the one making it real." He looked around at her space, at the wall of happy customers. "This is the revenge, you know? Not the company, not the money. It's this. It's creating a place where a person like you can thrive and a person like him can't." The story of Arch Motor Company's origin became legendary. It was a powerful marketing tool, but it was also true. The punch heard round the world became a business school case study in turning a negative into a world-changing positive. People weren't just buying cars. They were buying into a philosophy. They were taking a stand against the Garys of the world. The company grew at an astonishing rate, not just because the cars were good, but because people trusted the brand. They trusted the man who started it all. A year later, Gary was still at the warehouse. The shock had worn off, replaced by a dull, chronic ache of regret. He was no longer angry at Keanu or Chloe. He was only angry at himself. One afternoon, riding the bus home, he saw it. A brand new Arch Motor Company dealership. It was bright and inviting with big glass windows and a simple, elegant sign. There were no giant, inflatable, wacky-waving men, no banners screaming about crazy deals. Just a building that looked calm and confident. He watched as a family walked out, laughing, the father holding up a set of sleek, new keys. A salesperson, a young man with a genuine smile, waved goodbye to them. There was no pressure, no stress. Just a happy transaction between people who treated each other with respect. Gary leaned his head against the cold glass of the bus window. He saw his reflection, a tired, worn-out face he barely recognized. He thought about the force of his punch, the temporary, violent power he had felt in that moment. And then he thought about Keanu. He hadn't fought back with force. He had fought back with an idea. He had taken the energy from that punch, from all that anger and frustration, and had used it to build something. Something better. Something that would last. The bus pulled away from the curb, and the dealership disappeared from view. Gary closed his eyes. He finally understood. True power wasn't about the strength of your fist or the loudness of your voice. It was about the strength of your character. It was about having the vision to build a better world, not just for yourself, but but for everyone in response to the worst one. And as the bus rumbled on, carrying him back to his small, empty apartment, Gary knew he had lost in the most complete way imaginable. He had tried to destroy a man, and in return that man had made him irrelevant.